I want to thank you for being partisans, and I want to thank you for being passionate. We live in a day and age when there are folks of the other party and in the press and in academia who complain all day, all night about a lack of civility. They say that things have changed, that the politics today is unduly passionate, that it's cruel, that it lacks civility. Well, here's the deal. That's a bunch of crap, if I can be honest with you. Because American politics have always been a bare-knuckle undertaking. If you have any knowledge of American history, you see that. From the days of Washington and Jefferson, men who represented different philosophies, who directly or through surrogates just beat the living snot out of each other. From the first days of our republic to these, we have fought passionately over what we believe in. And I appreciate the fact that you continue that tradition, because that tradition is the fuel which has, I think, refined and purified our freedom. People standing up passionately for what they believe in and fighting for those things is what founded and has continued this nation. And I believe that this whole civility movement is nothing more than a word game. It is meant to silence those of you who truly believe in things. Because interestingly, while denouncing you, who are conservative, in harsh and decidedly uncivil tones, they say that your prime failing is that you are not civil to them. What is afoot is an effort to silence one side of the argument, an effort to make it so that social norms and expectations are that any time you speak in defense of a conservative principle, that you are being uncivil. So please be passionate and be partisan, and I want to thank you for that. This is a Lincoln Day dinner, and it was 151 years ago today that Abraham Lincoln slept for the last time in his bed in Springfield, Illinois. It was 151 years ago tomorrow that he boarded the train that would take him ultimately to Washington and ultimately to his doom. His last night being a free, independent citizen was 151 years ago tonight. I mention that because as he left his home, as he left the people he loved and with whom he had worked for decades, he was making a sacrifice that was necessary and essential to service. And that last night, saying farewell to what mattered to him, is a precious thing. 150 years ago today, the Civil War was about 10 months along. And our side, the side of the United States, had lost in every significant land engagement. We had been spanked from pillar to post, and things were looking poor. That was the status of 150 years ago today. 150 years ago tomorrow, a fairly young commander by the name of Ulysses S. Grant prepared to launch his attack against a place called Fort Donelson, Tennessee, which was held by a large contingent of Confederate forces. And they, under Grant, attacked and were soundly repelled at a great loss of life and men. Falling back and reorganizing, Grant sent a second wave against Fort Donelson. The Confederates came out with greater force and inflicted even greater casualties upon the Union forces, and the Union front fell back. Seeing the great damage that they had inflicted, the Confederates there on the battlefield commenced to rejoice. And there was yay-hooing and celebratory gunfire into the air. And they thought that this upstart attack against them had been stopped. They had been killed dead cold. Well, about a half an hour later, thundering over the horizon, in a third full frontal assault, his numbers rather significantly decreased, came Ulysses S. Grant. And he pounded the living hell out of those folks. And within a short span of hours, out came an emissary from the Confederates, and they asked young Ulysses S. Grant for terms. What conditions would he be willing to accept to receive their surrender? And he sent back an interesting message. He said, "No terms short of absolute and unconditional surrender." He had come to win. He had not come to make a deal with the devil. He had not gone down there to go halfway. Well, listen, what was the Civil War about? To be honest with you, and I don't mean to be offensive to our friends the Democrats, but if we can be completely honest, it was a war between the philosophy of the Republican Party of that day and the Democratic Party of that day. The Republican Party of that day stood for freedom. The Democratic Party of that day stood for slavery and the debasement of the Constitution of the United States. In fact, the Republican Party was founded in revulsion against those two priorities of the Democratic Party. So firm and sure was the love of the people of the early Republican Party for the concept of liberty and the preservation of constitutional principle that they formed a political movement which took this nation to war, believing that even the shedding of blood was a worthwhile price to pay for liberty and constitutional principle. Well, we know how that war ended. Here's something I would suggest, that over the 150 years since, nothing has changed. The Republican Party still stands for freedom, and the Democratic Party still stands for slavery and the debasement of the United States Constitution. Here's how I mean. Certainly, the Democrats are not forging metal chains around anyone's ankles or wrists, but I would suggest that the slavery of today, actively espoused by the Democratic Party, has two wicked heads. One is placed upon the taxpayer, who pays money not just to fund the legitimate function of government, but he pays a redistributive tax, which is nothing but theft, which violates the biblical teaching that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat your bread. The taxpayer of today, because of principles and policies of the Democratic Party, is a slave to a government who takes immoral and inappropriate amounts of what he has earned. That's one of the heads of the slavery espoused by the Democrats of today. The second is less obvious, but even more pernicious, and it is the slavery of dependence. It is a slavery which steals from people their self-reliance, which tells them that they have no responsibility for themselves. Rather, they have entitlements to the fruit of other people's labors. And that slavery is wildly destructive. Look what it has done to the family structure of populations with high percentages of welfare dependence. We see that in America's big cities, and to be honest with you, in our own county, we see it in some of our most rural communities. The welfare state, which is envisioned and promoted by the Democrats, is a horrific and evil act of enslavement upon the recipient class. Because once you sup at that trough, your ability, your inclination to stand on your own 2 feet and once again be a truly free American is dramatically diminished.